So I'm actually using a different edition than I normally do. We're up to the Torah blessings, Biur HaTefilla. So on mine, it's on page 35. If you have another edition of it, let me know what page you have, just so
You have the first edition, Rabbi, and be aware that there's a gross mistake in it, and it's my fault. And it's on the bracha of Shalom Sani Aved. I wrote Jewish slave, and it's not. It's a Canaanite slave. So I just want to tell you that the edition you have, which is we corrected it already by the second edition.
Okay, great. Okay, we're not gonna get up to that today, anyways. But okay, great. So 35 or whatever page on another edition you have, the Torah blessings, and we'll be looking at them in the Siddur as well.
Page
Also,
26. Page
say it again, Steve. What page?
Page 26 in the Maimonides edition.
Okay, great. So either 26 or 35.
I have 39.
You have 39. Okay. Also, as we're gonna be discussing learning it together as always, and we appreciate very much people's participation and questions, comments. We've had some people join over the last couple of weeks, and we have Brookline people who are not living in Brookline anymore, who never lived in Brookline. So again, maybe just share your name, maybe where you're living now, another brief sentence or two before you share something. I had a couple requests for that. I think that would be a great idea. Hopefully we're all just getting to know each other and building relationships as we're learning together as well. Okay, so let's begin. The Torah blessings. I hope it's okay. I'm going to skip 2 paragraphs. We're going to begin on the 3rd paragraph. In this section, a very interesting general comment Rabbi Wohlgemuth will make. He says, in ancient times, different versions of the prayer service emerged. In terms of the exact wording, this occurred frequently since the prayers were not yet written down. The Jews of Babylonia had one version, and the Jews in Israel had another. So there were different communities in Babylonia and Israel. And whether it was in the context of tefillah or other things, sometimes there were different disagreements, different versions, different traditions, with the Talmud Bavli, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the 2 Talmuds. And Rabbi Wohlgemuth says it is more or less correct to say that the customs of the Jews in Babylonia evolved into the Sephardic text. This is true regarding tefillah and in general in halacha. Because the Jews of Babylonia went to Spain, they eventually made their way to Spain, those communities. And the custom of the Jews in Israel evolved into the Ashkenazic text, because the Jews of Israel followed the Roman armies into Germany and the rest of Europe. Now, nothing is ever that simple, and like he says, it's more or less correct, but this is just an interesting sort of some historical point to understand. We all are familiar with sort of the 2 traditions, Ashkenazim, Sephardim. Ashkenazim are coming from more, the Germanic and European lands, and the Sephardim we normally associate with the Middle Eastern countries, but they originally were coming from North Africa and Spain, Portugal, etc. But really, those 2 communities are really the continuations of 2 earlier communities when the Jewish people were broken up into the communities of Israel and Babylonia. So that's just and that's true for halakha in general, that many trace them in Hagim along those lines. Okay, let's continue with right. There's Nusach Sfard, which is right. I won't get to that right now, Louise, but yes, correct. Okay, next paragraph. The Ashkenazi version can be subdivided into the German version and the Polish version in terms of the traditions and texts of tefillah. The Elbe River in Germany, which runs from the North Sea down to Galicia, was the border between the 2 cultural customs. West and south of the river was the Germanic version, north and east of the river was the Polish version. Both versions had certain variations. For example, the German version has slightly different blessings over the Torah from the Polish version. The Germans also do not locate them at the beginning of the Siddur after Elokai Neshama. but rather at the end of the preliminary blessings before the section about the sacrifices, after Birchot HaShachar. Okay, so there's some slight differences, even within the Ashkenazi tradition, German versus Polish. Okay, let's continue with the next paragraph. How many blessings are contained in the blessings over the Torah? Okay, let's not read anymore. Let's open up our siddur. So please try to find Birchot HaTorah in your siddur. Okay, who wants to be brave and tell me how many brachos you think there are? And there's more than one correct answer, so. 2, Louise says 2. Okay, so I'm going to assume if Louise says 2, she means this. The first one begins, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot sivan alasot b'divrei Torah. Then that continues and concludes with Hamlamei Torah Lamo Yisrael, and that's printed all as one paragraph, one continuous blessing. Okay, good. And then the second bracha is Asher Bachar Banu, concluding with Nosein HaTorah. Now, I'll just point out I'm using a Koren siddur. If you can see in mine, it actually has V'tzivan alasot b'divrei Torah, and then a new paragraph beginning V'ha'arev na, which would, it seems to break them up. You wouldn't think to do that if that was one bracha. I'm not sure. Does anyone else? I think most siddurim printed all as one paragraph. Is that correct?
Let me comment on that, if I may. Yeah, let me comment on that. It turns out that according to the Rambam, the Harevna is a bracha smucha l'chavda. It's a separate bracha, but it leans on the Asher Kishem Sotzav before it for Shem and Malchut, according to the Rambam. And what justifies the Rambam's position more than anything else is that we do not have in any case Asher Kishem Sotzav being a bracha aruka. It's always a bracha katsara. And this and Hallel are the two cases where you have a case of bracha smucha l'kavata. The foundation bracha is a bracha katsara. In all other cases, the foundation bracha is a bracha aruka. And from this point of view, this is why I personally agree with the Rambam, because of the fact that Shirki Shemot Tzav has never been a bracha aruka.
Okay, excellent. We'll discuss the Rambam. Okay, but so there is a dispute if this paragraph, the first paragraph, is really one or two brachos. If Harev Na is the beginning of a new bracha, or it's just one long paragraph. You know, the difference would be, would you say an amen after lasot b'divrei Torah, or if it's one long bracha, you obviously would only respond amen at the very end. So let's see what Rabbi Wohlgemuth says.
Birnbaum also has it as split.
What has a split? Which
Birnbaum siddur also has it the same way the Koran has it.
Say it again, Will. I didn't hear you. Which siddur?
Okay. The Birnbaum siddur.
Birnbaum. Okay.
Yeah, it has the same way.
And we saw Rinat Yisrael has it as one. I think Art Scroll has it as one paragraph. Okay. So let's continue in Rabbi Wohlgemuth. How many blessings are contained in the blessings over the Torah? Maimonides and the Tosfos differ on how to count them. The Tosfos are of the opinion that there are only two blessings, and that first one is a combined bracha. So he will first analyze it according to Tosfos' understanding. The first blessing begins with Baruch atah Hashem asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot sivan lasot b'divrei Torah, and it continues with V'ha'arev na. He says, this is what he says. In most siddurim, this phrase begins a new paragraph, but it should be part of the same paragraph, according to Tosfos. That is what Rabbi Wohlgemuth says. The word and also there was a big debate, much ink spilled. Should there be a vav on V'ha'arev, or should it begin ha'arev? If it's a new paragraph, it would be ha'arev, but if it's a continuation, maybe there should be a conjoining vav. The word and means that it is a continuation and should be treated as part of the same blessing. And it concludes with Hamlamei Torah Lamo Yisrael. The second blessing, according to Tosfos, is the bracha of Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'nasan Lanos Torah So Baruch atah Hashem Nosein HaTorah. Okay, so we have two blessings. Now this leads us to the obvious question. Actually, Rabbi Wohlgemuth writes, we should have only one blessing, not two. Whenever we fulfill a commandment, we say a blessing, but only one blessing for each commandment. There is never an occasion when you say more than one blessing for the performance of a commandment. that renders it the position of Tosfos, who seem to say we have two blessings, problematic. Why are there two blessings for the study of the Torah? Now, his question is a very good question, but let me just give you a little bit of background that he doesn't provide. In the Gemara itself records a dispute. What is the proper bracha to say for Biur HaTefilla, for learning? And one of the Chachamim says this version, one of the Chachamim says another version, and somewhat unique. The Gemara says, they're all really nice brachos. It's hard to decide which one we should say. And I want to look at the text. These are beautiful brachos. So the Gemara's conclusion is, you know what? We'll say all of them. So we say multiple brachos. But that doesn't really answer the question, why should there be multiple brachos when, and for every other mitzvah, there's only one bracha. So Rabbi Wohlgemuth suggests the following. They would defend their position, however, by claiming that one blessing is said on each of the two aspects of the Torah, the written and the oral. The first blessing, la'asok b'divrei Torah, which means to engage the Torah. It's even more, of an engrossing language than just study or read the Torah, right? La'asok is to engage the Torah, in-depth learning. That should refer to the oral Torah, because the word lasok means to be involved with, to discuss. And the oral Torah implies one rabbi or one person talking with another. The second blessing speaks about Matan Torah, right? Asher bachar banu mikol amim, he chose us amongst all the nations. V'natan lanu Torah, and he gave us his Torah. So that's referring to Har Sinai, which was the giving of the written law. The Torah is a great gift. So just as we thank God for the benefit we get from eating an apple or a steak, let me see if I want to read this or not. Okay, let us pause here for a second. Let's look at these brachos together inside. And they're really, really beautiful, beautiful brachos. So we have the first bracha. Let's just read it together and translate. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvah b'tivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Hashem has commanded us to grapple with, to engage the Torah. And then there's a prayer or request. V'ha'arev na Hashem Elokeinu et divrei Toratcha. Hashem, please make sweet the words of your Torah. B'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael, in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel. V'ni anachnu, and we. V'tzetzainu, and our descendants. And then here's another version. Some have v'tzetza'ei tzetzainu, the descendants of our descendants. V'tzetzaemcha beit Yisrael, the descendants of all of Israel. Kulani yodei shemach v'lomdei toratacha lishma. We should all be of those who know your name and study your Torah for its sake. Baruch atah Hashem hamlamei Torah l'mo Yisrael. Blessed is Hashem who teaches Torah to his people. And then the second bracha is Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. Hashem chose us from all the other nations. V'natan lanu et Torato, and gave us the Torah. Baruch atah Hashem noteinu Torah. Hashem is the one, blessed is Hashem, who gives the Torah. So Rabbi Wohlgemuth's suggestion is we have two brachos, assuming there's only two. And the first is focused primarily on the oral Torah, which includes how we interpret the written Torah, traditions, etc., how we apply the Torah to modern day life. And the second bracha refers to the giving of the written Torah, the 5 books of the Torah. I want to hear what you think. Let's contrast the two conclusions of the brachos. We have, or let's pause. Let's think for a second. What does the second bracha add to the first bracha? How is it not just repetitive and using synonyms? What does the second bracha add to the first bracha?
Legitimacy.
What do you mean?
It's there in writing in the second one, which confirms the fact that your lasok I know it doesn't mean to live it. But in a way, life is about the business of living it. So how you live it. So you do that orally and by deed. So if you talk about the first one is the way you're living it, and the next one, well, we gave you this in writing and it confirms that this is what you're supposed to be doing.
Okay, fine. Okay.
But-
Very good point.
but
Who else wants to say something?
I wanted to say something. The first bracha, it says Asher Bachar Banu, that's totally different, that we were chosen.
Excellent, right? The second bracha is adding this concept of chosenness. The first bracha is really just about the study of Torah. There's a mitzvah, and it's very interesting. We're also davening that the study of Torah should be sweet to us. But the second bracha is really saying that the idea of Torah study and that we have the Torah is, there's really a much bigger idea. And it seems that Torah study more than a particular mitzvah sort of expresses the idea that we are Hashem's chosen people. Right, it's adding that whole element that we have the Torah, that means that we're his chosen people. So there's sort of two aspects to Torah study. When we study the Torah, there's just a mitzvah of studying Torah. And we also see that as affirming we are his people. He gave the Torah to us. We are the chosen people. So maybe that's another reason why we have two brachos, connected to these two ideas. Any other thoughts on the difference between the two brachos?
Let
me draw your attention to the
means to apply it. In other words, to take this legal system and to apply it to our way of life. That's what I think. In other words, it isn't just here's a legal system, take it or leave it. This is a legal system for which the state. Remember that in the very first 6 Noahide laws, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to the world, every society has to set up a legal system. So when God decided that we were Am Segula, and Am Segula doesn't mean chosen, it means, what's the word I want to use? Mesugal. Can't think of the English word Mesugal. Anyway, we'll get to it. I'll think of the right word. When he chose us to be, because he thought we were qualified, that's the word. We were qualified, we were people qualified to follow the legal system which he wanted to give to a group of people. That's why he chose us, and that's why he developed us into a nation, which he happened to do in Egypt, as we read in the very last sentence of Pashat Tzitzis. And therefore, there was a legal system that he gave to us. And Lasok with Divrei Torah is the fact that we are applying it. This is the legal system.
Yeah, that's similar to what Carol was saying. Lasok is living it, is applying it. Let me draw your attention to the concluding line of each bracha, and after that, we'll go back to Rabbi Wohlgemuth. We're here to learn from Rabbi Wohlgemuth.
Can I ask?
Yes, please, Linda. Yeah.
So one time I asked you about why we say Chasidim Tovim, and the idea of making it sweet. So not just that we use it, but and this goes along with what your mother said about Asher Bachar Banu, like we've been chosen, and also that it's made sweet to us. It's not just that we use it, but it's sweet.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
That seems to me to add a different aspect. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just, last point before we read a little bit more from the Rabbi Wohlgemuth. Louise made a good point. Rabbi Wohlgemuth himself is going to bring that up in a little bit, so I'll wait to see what he says. What is the difference between the conclusion of Hamelamed Torah Lamo Yisrael, blessed is Hashem, who is the teacher of Torah to his people Israel, versus Notein HaTorah, blessed is Hashem who gave us the Torah? What's the difference between the two of them? Or is it just synonymous? Hashem teaches us the Torah versus Hashem gives us the Torah. Any thoughts? I'll tell you something that occurred to me. Just again, there's nothing right or wrong, but Hamlamed Torah Lamo Yisrael, on one hand, is a beautiful, intimate sort of imagery or feeling that Hashem is our teacher. He's our Melamed. He's our teacher. We're his students. But Okay, that's one idea. Hashem is teaching us the Torah. But Notena Torah, Hashem has given us the Torah. That is in some ways more profound, right? Hashem is saying, Hashem has given us the Torah. He said, the Torah is now ours. The famous one, Lo Shmaimi, the Torah is not in heaven. Hashem has given us the Torah. It's now ours. In fact, he's not teaching it to us. It's ours to interpret, ours to decide. He's so to speak, given up control over it. It's a present that he's given to us, and now is ours. So perhaps maybe that's another layer of meaning that we can hear in these different formulations. Okay, let's go back to Rabbi Wohlgemuth. We're going to skip just a little bit. So I'm skipping a couple paragraphs. On mine, it's page 38, the paragraph that begins, but there is still something. Hopefully everyone has that.
Mhm.
But there is still something that bothers the Tosfos. Again, Rabbi Wohlgemuth's theory is that one bracha is the written Torah, one bracha is the oral Torah. Why do we first thank God for the oral Torah and only then for the written Torah? This is similar to Louise's question. You would think that Har Sinai, the giving the Torah, Asher Bachar Banu, should be the first bracha, and then La'asok, to delve into, to apply, should be the second bracha. It should be the other way around. Logically, the written Torah was given first, and then God gave Moshe the interpretations little by little, and Moshe taught them to the Jewish people. We seem to be reversing the sequence. Here again, we have an example of the rabbis polemicizing against people who are deviating from mainstream Judaism. I'm not sure if this is his interpretation or is this based on an earlier commentary. Throughout Jewish history, Jews denied the validity of the oral Torah. There were some Jewish groups that denied the oral Torah. Because of such movements, the rabbis decided that the first blessing should emphasize the oral law. There can be no Judaism without the oral law. The Christians appropriated the written law and claimed that they had understood its true meaning. The Muslims did too. The oral law is what makes us Jews. As a result, the Tosfos said that we should first thank God for the oral law and then the written law. So that's Rabbi Wohlgemuth's suggestion. Perhaps he cited an earlier source.
Well, what justifies his position is the fact that if there's a disagreement between the written and the oral law is the one that we follow. The best example is the one we had last fall, where we didn't blow shofar in the first day of Rosh Hashanah. We didn't take Arba Minim in the first day of Sukkot. It's the oral law, which is actually the practice, that which is practice. It's not, if there's a contradiction, it's the oral law which takes precedence, not the written law.
Yep, that is true. That's certainly true. Yeshua, Joel. Okay, let us skip 2 more paragraphs. We say, and make sweet please Hashem our God, the words of your Torah in our mouths and the mouths of the people of Israel. May we, the whole house of Israel, be knowledgeable of your name and learners of your Torah. What does it mean, knowledgeable of your name? One of the phrases is, we should all be Yodei Shemecha. We should be of those who know your name. We are already familiar with God's names. When we ask to learn Torah, we know what that means. We have to study and work hard. When it says, make sweet please in the mouths of our children, we know this means that we have to lighten the workload a little bit. I'm not sure what he means by that exactly. He says in the bottom, they used to give children cake with apples and honey. But what does it mean we should know God's name? There are 2 possible interpretations, at least. The word Yodei, knowledgeable, is quite often used as a substitute for love, such as V'ha'adam yadat Chava ishto, and Adam knew Chava, his wife. So therefore, the phrase seems to mean that we should know God's name, but we should love God's name. This is a very high level of spirituality. It's very simple to know God's name, but to love God and give everything we have to God is a bit more demanding. So one interpretation is Yodei Shemecha, those who know, are connected, love God's name. Another interpretation of knowing God's name is that we should know the meaning of God's name. We've already noted there are several names. Each name represents a particular attribute of God. Elohim is God as judge. The Tetragrammaton refers to Hashem's attribute of mercy. Aleph Dalet Nun Yud is he is the owner of everything. Hashem Tzvakos is the creator of the heavenly host. Whenever we say a prayer, we reach full kavod only if we understand the meaning of the name of God. So we should fully understand all these different meanings. That's another interpretation. He doesn't mention this, right? It clearly harkens back to, right, Moshe the burning bush. He asked God, what is your name? I want to know your name. Hashem doesn't really give him a clear answer, but does anyone else have any thoughts when you hear that phrase? What does it mean exactly that we want ourselves and our children to be those who know God's name? Any other thoughts other than what Rabbi Wohlgemuth suggests?
I think what you said has an enormous amount of validity. The concept of to know is to love. Remember, this whole relationship between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very much of a mutual relationship. And as we will see, tefillah is dialogue from beginning to end. And therefore, again, therefore the concept of loving in both directions is critical to the existence of the Jewish people.
Yasher Koach, beautiful. Okay, so before we conclude our discussion of Berachos HaTorah, I just want to again reiterate these are very, very important brachos. I meant to open with this. There's a famous Gemara that says that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed al shelo berchu batorah tchila, that they did not recite the blessing before they learned Torah. Now, what does that mean? Why is that so horrible that the Beis HaMikdash would be destroyed because of that? So the commentaries explain it was symbolic or an example of either people didn't appreciate, it means they didn't appreciate the holiness and the gift of Torah, the gift to be able to study the Torah. That means they didn't make a blessing before they studied it, or it had become kind of a cultural or intellectual pursuit, but they didn't view it as a holy pursuit. And that's what it means they didn't make the bracha. Either literally they wouldn't make a bracha, or means they would make a bracha without feeling, without understanding, without kavana. And so there's a long tradition of really placing great emphasis on these brachos. And they are beautiful brachos. We're davening Hashem, make the words of the Torah sweet in our mouths and the mouths of the children of Israel. We're saying this bracha that you have Asher Bachar Banu, you have chosen us from all the other nations. I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's hard. It's kind of early in the morning when I'm saying these brachos. It's hard to, really be in a inspired state. But they really are inspiring brachos. They really are beautiful brachos. So we should try to feel the meaning when we say them. I'm not going to discuss them long, but immediately after Berachos HaTorah, so we say a few psukim, Yevarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, and then there is a Mishnah that we read, and then there is a Brisa, which is a teaching found in the Gemara, not from a Mishnah, to sort of be examples of all the different areas of the Torah that we should learn a little bit immediately after we recite the brachos before learning. These are just examples that became traditional to use these examples. The blessing of the Kohanim, those are psukim that everyone would know by heart, so they're easy psukim to ask everyone to say. But they're examples of Torah study, and then these brachos apply to all the Torah that we will learn the rest of the day. Okay. We're going to skip the rest of the chapter. Rabbi Wohlgemuth then it's a tangent on the Berachos HaTorah before an Aliyah, which is not, what I want to focus on right now. I just want to continue the order of the davening. So we'll actually turn to chapter 3. In my book, that's 48. And we'll move on to the next section of brachos. Also very interesting, very beautiful brachos. Okay, the morning blessings. The next group of blessings consists of two different types: blessings over activities that we do upon getting up in the morning, and blessings of formation. He'll explain what that means. The blessings begin with Asher nasan lasachvi bina lavchim ben yom vein laila, who gave the rooster the understanding to distinguish between day and night. And proceed from Pokeach Ivrim, who opens the eyes of the blind, until Hamavir Sheina, who removes sleep from the eyes. Okay. The first blessing that God gave the rooster, the understanding to distinguish between day and night, refers to the fact that the rooster is the first creature to welcome the morning. The rooster instinctively knows that morning has come. This is the ancient alarm clock, right? That's how people woke up. Okay, now even though this is the way most Siddurim translate this blessing, there is a better translation, Rabbi Wohlgemuth says, quite daringly. The word sechvi, rooster, is found in the book of Job, and there it means the human heart. This would render the translation, who gave the human heart the understanding to distinguish between day and night. I prefer this translation because most of us never hear a rooster these days. And what benefit do we derive, from the rooster? Are we even permitted to say it if it would mean a rooster? But if it means that God gave the human heart understanding, then I am seeing the blessing out of a personal benefit. In other words, the first thing we thank God for is the ability to discern between day and night. All human scholarship, learning, and understanding starts with the ability to discern one thing from another. We are therefore thanking God for giving us a thinking mind. Now, the truth is, in the early commentaries, the Rishon and medieval authorities, it seems pretty clear that this bracha was written with the intention that it should have a double meaning. That sechvi does mean rooster, and the Gemara says quite explicitly, you would say this bracha when you hear the rooster. But it was understood it also can mean the human heart or human intelligence, and it was meant to capture both. And he is correct that for us, the human heart meaning is more relevant than the rooster. Now, let's look at our siddur.
Interestingly enough, when my wife and I were in Havana in 2007 doing research, you could hear roosters early morning. And I know in Old Havana in Miami, here now, you'll see roosters as decoration. I'm not entirely sure, but it's probably somehow related in the Cuban culture to the same things that we were just talking about.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. So if you open up your siddur to Birchot HaShachar, beginning with that first bracha, Asher Nasan Lasachvi Vina. So we're skipping we're going to look at that bracha, then we're skipping the next three brachos, which are really a different category, the Shalo Asanis, etc. And then we're going to continue with Pokeach Ivrim, Malbish Arumim, Matir Asurim. Everyone following me? Everyone see which brachos we're looking at? Okay. So Rabbi Wohlgemuth says as follows. In Talmudic times, these blessings were not said together in the synagogue. Nowadays, this is the first thing. This is where davening begins. The chazan gets up there. The chazan rattles off all these brachos. We say amen. But in the days of the Gemara, these were not said in shul. They were said at home as the proper occasion arose. Might have taken an hour more to say them. We'll see what he means by that. So let's say you woke at 6 a.m. It was daylight. You would hear the rooster. The Gemara says, when you hear the rooster, you wake up and you say, Asher nasan lasachvi vina, blessed is the Lord who gave the rooster the intelligence to discern between day and night. He says, find it difficult to get up. You might close your eyes for a while. You roll back. So you would say the bracha and roll back over. When you finally opened your eyes again, and you're really awake, you fully open your eyes, you would say, Pokeach Ivrim. Pokeach Ivrim means the one, Hashem, who opens the eyes of the blind. That's not just sort of like a general blessing to thank God for human sight. You would say that when you would open your eyes. Then when you get dressed, you would say, Malbish Arumim, blessed is the Lord who dresses the naked or the unclothed. And these blessings were said as each activity was performed. A Jew knows that nothing should be taken for granted, that every good thing is a special kindness from God. We sometimes forget that we have to thank God for all those little things that are part of our daily ritual. So I want to look at the siddur now and go through each blessing. And, it must have been really, really interesting. We no longer do this, and we'll discuss why we no longer do this as we're getting up, and we've sort of just condensed them all, put it in the siddur, and we say it in the shul. But if you look at your siddur, so again, the first bracha is Asher Nasan Lasach Vivina. You would hear the rooster, you would say a bracha. Then you would wake up, Pokeach Ivrim. When you open your eyes, you would say Pokeach Ivrim. Then the Gemara imagines back then it was typical you would like slide on a gown underneath your blanket before you would get out of bed. So as you would put on your whatever you're wearing, like your clothing, you would say, "Blessed is the Lord who dresses the naked." Malbisha Ramim. And then I think it's when you would sit up, just your first time sitting up. That was Matir Asurim. God releases those who are like bound. So that your first movement, you thank Hashem that I can move. Then Zokef Kefufim is though he straightens the bent. That was when you would get out of bed. You put your feet on the floor, and you would totally be standing up. You would say Zokef Kefufim. Roka haaretz al hamayim. That was your feet feeling the ground beneath your feet. You would say, "Blessed is the Lord who spreads out the earth on the water." Right? It's really incredible, right? Something we would totally take for granted, but just the sensation of your feet on firm ground, you would be mindful of, and you would say a blessing over that. Then, Sha'asa li kol tsarki, that God has made for me all that I need. Now, what is that referring to? So if you know the answer, you already know the answer, but is anyone who does not know the answer, what was okay? Interesting suggestion, Louise. Food. God makes for everything that I need. Any other suggestions? What would you think it is? What are we referring to? Other than just being a catch-all blessing. So the answer, very good. So maybe Linda, I don't know if you knew that or it's a good guess. So Linda's correct. Very good, Louise. We're gonna get to that. It refers to shoes. Sha'asali kol tsarki. God makes for me everything that I need. Now, I believe the reason why it means that is because in ancient times, not everyone had shoes. If you were poor, you didn't have shoes. So shoes were almost a necessity, but not quite a necessity. So if you had shoes, you're saying, and God has made for me everything that I need. I even have shoes. Because not everyone had shoes. So when you would put your shoes on, you would say Shasali Kol Tsarki. Hamechim Mitzadei Gavar, he sets the steps of a person. So your first step, Ozer Yisrael Bigvura, he girds Israel with strength, is when you would put on your belt or your sash. Oter Yisrael B'tifara, you would put on your hat or head covering. He crowns us with glory. And then Noten Layav Koach is a bit of an exception. We're going to skip that. And then Ma'avir Shinaz, then you'd go and wash up and, wash your hands and feet and face. And that was the bracha you would say with that. So initially, in days of the Gemara, this was the order of brachos associated with basically getting up and getting ready for the day. And it was not part of Shacharit. It was not said in shul. It was not said communally. Everyone said it individually in their own home. And really, it's quite a beautiful thing, I think. Let's go back to Rabbi Wohlgemuth. I want to finish up this section, at least in general. We have about 15 minutes left. Continuing exactly where we're up to. The Shulchan Aruch, which is one of the most important sources of Jewish law, represents the work of two people. Getting a little background here. Rabbi Joseph Karo, who lived in Sfat, Israel in the 16th century, represents most of the Sephardic rites and opinions. And Rabbi Moshe Israelis, who lived in Krakow, Poland at the time. He added Ashkenazi customs. Rabbi Kairo's opinion is that the proper place to say these blessings is in the home as the proper occasion arises, which is what the Gemara says. But he adds, according to earlier sources, Jews may get confused, right? So not everyone has a siddur. If you tell everyone, say the right bracha at the right time, it was too hard for most people. Not everyone has such a good Jewish education. So at a certain point, there was a decision made. We're just going to put them in the siddur. We're going to have the chazan say it in shul, and everyone will listen and say amen. They may not remember which blessing is for which activity, which one is for your shoes, which one is for your hat. So we just put it into the synagogue service. And that's what we do. So that is what we do, but it really is not the way our sages originally imagined it. So what I would recommend, something that I found very meaningful, if you know what each of these brachos means, so you can kind of like feel it or be focused on that when you're saying it. So some are obvious. When you say pokeach ivrim, you should be kind of feeling your eyes, feeling your eyesight. And malbish armim, you can even like feel your clothes. Your thank you Hashem for my clothes. When you say zokef kefufim, you should stand up a little taller, than you would normally. Shasali kol sarki, you can sort of feel your feet in your shoes, feel your feet on the ground. So even though we don't still do it the way they described it in the Talmud, we can at least sort of be mentally, be imagining, feeling these things as we say these blessings. Any thoughts or comments on what we've been discussing so far? No. Okay. So let's continue a little bit. Okay. We're next paragraph actually. Rabbi Isserlis changed the understanding of the nature of these blessings. He said that you are not supposed to say them when you fulfill the actions, but you should say them all at once in gratitude to God. So what he means is, we no longer say them when we're doing these things, we say them in shul. But the question is, let's say you're such a poor person and you don't have shoes. So would you say the bracha for shoes? Do we assume that these brachas are only if you yourself are personally experiencing them? Or is it sort of a blessing, thanking Hashem in general for these things, that the world has these things? And even if you are not experiencing them, you would say the blessing. So this is a dispute. According to Rabbi Cairo, if there's a day when I do not get dressed, I have the flu, I would not say the blessing for getting dressed. Rabbi Isserlis, however, says that I should. He sees them as blessings of praise and thanks for what God does for the whole human race. Whether I personally put on my clothes is immaterial. So another example of this, another application is what Louise mentioned in the chat, is that there are different opinions on a fast day, Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, where we don't at least wear leather shoes. So do you still recite the blessing for putting on shoes? So the standard Ashkenazi practice is that we do. I believe Sephardim maybe don't. I think the Vilna Gaon's opinion was that we don't. So most people still do, but there are some that don't. So Louise, that's the connection to the fast days, because we don't wear shoes on certain fast days. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? If not, we'll continue. Okay, great. Yes, Carol. You're sorry, just unmute yourself, Carol.
Unmute yourself.
I did, sorry, thank you. My finger was slow. In a sense, it sort of, in a way, changes, either it's changed or it's added to the meaning of this, because if you're doing it at home, it's clearly very personal. You do it when, it's like eating a piece of fruit or having making a motzi or something. You say the bracha, you do it.
Yep.
So that coincides. When you bring it to the shul and everybody's saying it together, it kind of loses that. So it becomes a communal activity and a different way of giving thanks. And so it brings up the general question of what's specific in the connection and the joy and the love and being part of it, that we started out with the Torah blessings. And this is in a way part of it because it's part of the lasso and to live it. So it sort of brings up a little dissonance, I think, around this.
You're absolutely right that there really is something lost. That it was a different experience when everyone was seeing it at home, privately, and connected to those actual experiences. And you're right, the Ramah of Moshe Isserles even halachically more or less makes your point, and he says since we move it to the shul and say it communally, and it's no longer connected to the specific event or experience. So that's his proof that you can say it even if you don't have the experience at all. Even if you don't have shoes, you can say it because it's really a more general blessing that Hashem has blessed the world in general. But it's not personal, it's not individual in the same way anymore. You're right. It is a change. It is a change. Yeah.
Generally speaking, in the last 500 years, our whole approach to prayer has changed because of three events which have taken place. One is, of course, the fact that we now have printing, and therefore the concept of having a printed siddur in front of us is totally different than people who either simply had to listen to others who had copies or knew it by heart, or they were not, or they themselves knew it by heart, but they didn't have a standardization of the prayer through a printing process. The second difference was that in agriculture, the agricultural population has gone from approximately 90% of the population in the United States to 3% of the population. In Israel, it's less than 0.5% of the population. And therefore, we have no concept whatsoever, for example, of animal sacrifices. They're almost meaningless to us because we have no concept of our dealing with animals in general. And the third difference, and I think this is the major difference in the last 500 years, we are very fortunate that we do not live under a human absolute monarch. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, in fact, an absolute monarch. And therefore, we have some difficulty in appreciating our relationship with him as an absolute monarch, in contrast to our living in what we call democratic societies. And so these are the three major differences that have given us a totally different concept of tefillah in the last 500 years, contrary to what occurred or what people felt prior to let's say the year 1500 or 1600.
Yep, that's all true. Absolutely. We just have a few minutes left. We're going to skip a few paragraphs, or maybe even a page or two, and go to recently interesting about Rav Soloveitchik. On mine, it's on page 52. It's a paragraph beginning when Rav Soloveitchik davened. Maybe if someone has the other printing, let me know what page that's on, because we're skipping a few
39.
pages. 39. Okay, so either page 39 or 52.
Oh, wait, that's wrong.
Is that right? Is that, yeah?
Wait a minute.
Everyone have it when Rav Soloveitchik davened before the Amud? People see that? When Rav Soloveitchik davened before the Amud, meaning if he was the Chazan, he would skip the blessing, Hanosein Layaif Koach. That was the one that I skipped. Doesn't really fit the pattern because it is not mentioned in the Talmud. All the other brachos come from the Gemara. Hanosein Layaif Koach does not appear in the Gemara. It was added in the Middle Ages, probably as an aftermath of the First Crusade. Until the Crusades, the life of the Jews in Europe was relatively easy. It was not ideal, but a Jew could make a living and support himself. Jews were respected and had a certain number of rights. But with the Crusades, all of this ended. Jews had no more rights and were massacred in large numbers. After the First Crusade, when a Jew woke up in the morning, still alive, he or she would say, Hanosein la ya'ef koach, who gives strength to the weak or to the weary. The Jews added this blessing on their own. I'm not sure how much of this is Rabbi Wohlgemuth's theory or based on earlier sources as well. They wondered how could they persist in such a world? And they needed God to give them strength. They believed that if they could survive at all, it was a miracle. And even though that is such a beautiful idea, Soloveitchik did not believe that we should say blessings that are not mentioned in the Talmud, so he always skipped this blessing. So Soloveitchik did not say this bracha in the morning. So of course, throughout the generations, there have been certain prayers added to our tefillos, but as a general rule, the formal bracha structure, Baruch Atah Hashem, that was not added beyond what the Gemara established. Okay, of course we've added things. We added Yakum Parkan, Av Harachamim, Misha Beirachs, etc. But to add a bracha is exceedingly rare. There are a couple of examples, and this is one of them. And the general practice is that most people do say this bracha, and the other one or two exceptions. But there were some, and this is not an opinion that Soloveitchik made up on his own. This is probably his family tradition, the opinion of the Vilna Gaon. There were some people who didn't say that they were purists, right? In every field of study, in every sport, there are purists, and there are people who, are not absolute purists. So Soloveitchik was a purist. So he said, it's not in the Gemara. We don't say it. That's it. And again, this is part of a family tradition, part of a tradition of scholarship. It was not just, he woke up in the morning and said it, but it's just something to be aware of. Again, we do say it, but it really is a rare exception. We generally do not add a bracha beyond what the Gemara enacted.
Permit me to insert at this point that the expression "Noten layoef koach" appears in the book of Yeshayahu, Isaiah. It's the beginning of verse 29 of chapter 40. Noten layoef koach u'le'anim otzma yibeh. He giveth power to the faint, and to him that hath no might, he increases strength. Just be aware that this is where the three words come from.
It's based on a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Very interesting. I'll make sure I'll give another opportunity for people to make any comments or questions. Personally, okay, so Linda says, well, Linda, if you take a picture and send to me, I can try to make it out. Probably there's a footnote that says, not everyone says this. After Birchot HaShachar, after the morning blessings that we discussed today, there are a lot of things before Baruch Sha'amar and Psukei de Zimra. I think in our discussion, we're gonna skip that section, which maybe some people skip in the morning anyways, and skip to Baruch Sha'amar and Psukei de Zimra. I really want to get to Psukei de Zimra and Shema and Shemona Esrei, the real, essence of our tefillah. We can always come back and do some of these sections, and also hopefully of the book. So please, feel free to read any section we're not doing. So we're probably gonna skip the rest of chapter 3 next time. Hopefully no one objects strenuously, and we'll begin with Psukei de Zimra, which is, maybe we're even skipping 2 chapters. Let me check for a second. No, we're skipping to chapter 4, just skipping the rest of this chapter. So, I encourage you, read the rest of this chapter yourself if you'd like to, and we'll continue with chapter 4 next time. But I have to sign off in a couple minutes, but if anyone has any other questions or comments about what we are learning today, please feel free to share. Okay, all right, I've got to go anyways, so everyone have a great day, and we'll continue next week. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.